champion.
There is more than meets the eye when it comes to the man from Stevenage.
Is it easy to do?
No.
Lewis Hamilton has a secret side we rarely see a glimpse of. And whether you hate or love the 7-time world champion, here's the truth about the man himself.
Lewis Hamilton wins the Turkish Grand Prix and is a 7-time champion of the world.
Still proof that a dream is more powerful than history.
Firstly, we should mention that Lewis has been at the forefront of many movements. Now, whilst Lewis manages to avoid being labelled as part of these movements directly, he is the catalyst behind some of them. Perhaps you heard that the former champ turned to veganism in 2017, but this was not only to protect the environment. No, Lewis also had a point to prove, as many doctors had warned the young driver that he wouldn't be getting enough protein, which is often required by the physical demands of Formula One. However, Hamilton ignored all the warnings and continued to win the next 4 F1 championships in a row. Lewis had the following to say in 2022. I won 4 world titles since then. This certainly proved that regardless of the diet, absolute skill cannot be replicated, and the science might be flawed behind the F1's drivers' diets. But this might have caught up with the former champ, as he hasn't won any titles since. So, do you think the diet is to blame? Now, this is only the tip of the iceberg, as one of the biggest truths of Lewis Hamilton is his impact on societal norms and standards. In fact, the former champ has many haters and fans due to this. You see, the Black Lives Matter movement really kicked into full swing following a stint of supposed police brutality in the United States. Since then, many top celebrities have taken a stand and joined the liberation movement in an attempt to push the rhetoric. Among these influential athletes was Lewis Hamilton, but the Mercedes driver didn't only protest some of the problems associated with what happened, he managed to use his influence to make Formula One a platform for equality. The We Racers One slogan could be seen on every Formula One can during the season, and Hamilton even managed to get the Mercedes outfit to completely change their livery from being silver to completely black. And one cannot argue that the Mercedes looked great in black, but the black suits were frustrating, and Bottas was the first to complain how hot they are. So, with Lewis attaining great success and becoming truly revolutionary in the sport, many started doubting how the man got into Formula One. You see, the young kid from Stevenage would have had a hard time breaking into professional racing. His karting career might have been successful, but this was largely thanks to his father juggling numerous jobs to fund it. With financial troubles at such a young age, breaking into competitive sports would have been impossible. But we all need a boost from somewhere, and this would come through Niki Lauda, who would play a pivotal role in convincing Ron Dennis and the Mercedes team to endorse Lewis and back him financially. While this made life a bit easier for Lewis, his skills still had to be proven, and it took numerous years of racing in lower categories like Formula Renault for the youngster to prove himself. With the backing of Lauda, who was somewhat of a mentor to young Lewis, he certainly did have an easier way into the sport than someone like Michael Schumacher or Fernando Alonso. And speaking of Alonso, Lewis was thrust into his first competitive F1 season with a 2-time champ as his teammate. When Hamilton finally made his debut in 2007, he was thrust alongside reigning champion Fernando Alonso in the McLaren outfit. Now, we can argue that this gave him a great advantage to start his career at the front of the grid, but with a teammate like Alonso, it wouldn't be easy to be the best. However, Lewis had a stellar season, at one point looking to win his first Drivers' Championship on his debut, and this would have seen him break virtually every record at the time. Unfortunately, Ferrari was doing something right, and Kimi Raikkonen would eventually win by a single point over the rookie. Thanks to this performance, Lewis was thrust into the spotlight, and there was little doubt that he deserved his seat in the McLaren. However, it wasn't until the following year that Lewis truly showed his worth. In 2008, the F1 grid was once again extremely competitive, and both Ferrari and McLaren were exchanging blows in the early part of the season. Eventually, the competition came down to the Brazilian Felipe Massa and Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton would go on to clinch his first World Drivers' Championship in the final race of the season, which saw him become the world champion.
I've cried. My heart's feeling so much strain right now because I think it was the same for everyone.
Back then, many people truly bought into the hype around Lewis, and he was seen as the next best thing due to his string of consistent performances.
Pretty close, but you guys did a fantastic job.
Unfortunately, the following season, Brawn GP would demolish the F1 grid and win a season in truly dominating fashion. But Hamilton was not as loyal to McLaren as many might have thought, and his loyalties remained with Mercedes, who played a pivotal role in his days competing in the youth categories. With Red Bull starting an era of dominance, the McLaren seemed to be fading into the background. Mercedes, on the other hand, didn't do much better, but they had some of the biggest names in the sport. And among them was one of the best team bosses ever to grace a Formula One grid, Ross Brawn. Brawn didn't only have the ambition to turn Mercedes into a championship-winning team, but he had the knowledge to do so as well. While it failed when he signed two German drivers in Michael Schumacher and Nico Rosberg, Brawn always had Hamilton in mind. So when Schumacher was to step away from the sport again at the end of 2012, Brawn made the phone call to Hamilton. Even though Mercedes was only the fifth best team on the grid at the time, they had a trick up their sleeve. As mentioned earlier, Niki Lauda played a pivotal role in the early development of Lewis, and after a phone call to the British driver, it was all set. Hamilton made the shift to Mercedes, ditching McLaren in the process. Well, aside from that one moment when he drove into the McLaren pit box with his Mercedes by accident. While the move was controversial, it ultimately turned out to be great for Lewis, and the championships just kept on coming. Starting in 2014, Lewis became unbeatable in his Mercedes, and the British driver would go on to add another 6 world championships to his name. He might have stumbled against former teammate Rosberg in 2016, but this is only a small blip on the resume of the Brit. Hamilton seemed on fire, winning championship after championship and showing no signs of letting up. Even enduring the infamous winner's hate, where fans start to hate the best driver and hope that he's beaten at some point. But things get a bit dark here, as even though Lewis is seen as one of the kindest drivers on the grid and always presents himself as humble, the Mercedes driver has been no stranger to being a sore loser. In fact, his 2021 outburst
I'm just speechless, Lewis. Absolutely speechless.
was not the first time Lewis would throw a tantrum when things didn't go his way. He started showing his true colours as early as 2016. You see, the 2016 F1 season was a tough one for the British driver, and teammate Rosberg was on fire. Leading up to the final race in Abu Dhabi, Lewis had to win the race, with teammate Rosberg finishing lower than second if he was to win his 4th title. However, Rosberg understood this and placed himself in second place, not trying to overtake Lewis, and knew he only had to see out the race. In a stunning turn of events, the nice person Lewis was seen to be simply disappeared when he backed up the field in an attempt to screw his teammate out of the championship. Even after being instructed by race engineer Peter Bonington that he had to speed up, the Brit simply responded by telling his team that it didn't matter. This was only the first time Lewis was showing his darker side, and it turned from being the humble person we've grown to love to something fans never expected. But this was a common theme when Lewis didn't win, and no one could argue his public meltdown at the end of the 2021 F1 season. The 2021 F1 season was one of the most controversial in recent memory. Red Bull and Max Verstappen were on a charge to end Mercedes' dominance and did a great job at getting an early lead in the championship. Mercedes responded with a massive upgrade to the car, which made it miles faster than anything else on the grid. Hamilton could easily get through the field, starting the race in last place and winning at the end, but Verstappen was not going to let this happen. Even though Max had to remain within the rules of the sport, he did everything in his power to beat Lewis. A little bit of luck in the final race of the season saw the Dutch driver overtake Lewis on the final lap to become a world champion, but Lewis didn't take this well. In fact, protests from Mercedes and pending legal battles were on the table, forcing the FIA to get rid of the race director Michael Massey at the time. But Lewis himself had what many call a public meltdown. After the race, Lewis simply vanished from Formula One, and no one even knew if he would return. Hamilton was a no-show at the awards ceremony, even though the law states that the top 3 drivers in the championship should be present. This was the first time fans could see that Lewis Hamilton wasn't someone that could endure losing, and his passive-aggressive behaviour was slightly frustrating to deal with. But he managed to rebound, and a personality change came from all of this. Our final truth is that since reappearing in the 2022 season, Lewis has become one of the nicest human beings once again. Even though many people don't like him around the world, he always keeps his cool and tries to charm the crowds. In fact, Lewis has become the embodiment of the never say die attitude, and he's been pushing himself and his team to constantly improve. You can often hear him on the team radio praising those in the factory and motivating them to make even more improvements to the car and the team.
What a hectic. That's what I'm talking about! Yes!
Perhaps the 2021 season taught Lewis a few important lessons, and it seems as if the British driver is still just as motivated as ever, and his new change in personality is one that many people seem to like. Granted, it definitely helps him in the marketing of his clothing range with partner Tommy Hilfiger. But whether you hate or love the British driver, there is no doubt that Sir Lewis Hamilton will always be remembered as one of the greats. He's often compared to the great Michael Schumacher, so make sure you check our videos on the German driver as well, arguably the best to ever sit inside a Formula One car.